Welcome back to Visions. And our guests tonight are former Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser and Julian Burnside QC from the Justice Project. Welcome back. So, Mr Fraser, what brought about this passion in human rights?
In Australia? In
Australia, yes.
It's actions of governments which are acting quite contrary to, I think, what we had thought were a decent sense of Australian values, the sense of a fair go for everyone. And we really believe that people fleeing terror, whether it's from Iraq or Afghanistan or, for that matter, other places, should be treated humanely, decently, with some compassion, some concern for what they'd been through. But instead of being treated decently, people who arrived on Australia's shores were demonised. Oh, they'll become prostitutes, they'll be drug runners, they're queue jumpers, they're illegals. And we were given the impression that they were just terrible people. We all remember when we were told that they threw their children overboard. We don't want that sort of person in Australia. And then we found that those photographs were fraudulent. They were taken under entirely different circumstances, I think, when a ship was actually sinking. And there were a number of us who believed that, well, we've got to try and do something about this.
What were your first thoughts when you did see that vision?
I thought that the Liberal Party, which I joined a long while ago, had virtually ceased to exist. And I've been encouraged since by people within the party still fighting for, fighting the good fight. And they're opposing current legislation. I hope there are enough in the Senate who will vote against it and defeat the legislation in the Senate, because it was Menzies who ratified the Refugee Convention for Australia in 1954. He was always concerned about the rule of law, about equal access to the law. In recent years, governments have taken a number of decisions designed to put people outside the law, beyond the reach of law. And I think they get away with it because the majority of Australians believe, well, this doesn't really affect us. It affects them, people who are a bit different. And if you can make people believe that the ones who are different are not nice people anyway, well, then people just accept it. But that's not true, because a breach in basic rights, once it starts, it extends, it spreads, you get more discrimination in the community, and the government in these issues has been leading Australia very much in the wrong direction.
Mr Fraser, in a perfect world, what would you like to see happen with refugees?
I'd like to see people being treated humanely. After the war in South Vietnam, we decided that we had an ethical and a moral obligation to people that we'd been trying to support against the North. It had nothing to do with the rights or wrongs of the war. We'd been fighting with people. They were very much in danger, and I believed that we had a duty to do something about it, and we did. In some years, over 20,000 people came from Indochina into Australia in a year, and this was done quietly, without a fuss. They've established themselves in Australia. I think about 250,000 Vietnamese have come here. Not all refugees, many in the years since. And they're a valuable and energetic part of the Australian community. I met a young Vietnamese the other day who was a lieutenant in our Air Force. He'd been born here, but his parents came as a refugee. He had a thoroughly Australian accent also. And
you seem to have got great joy out of meeting this gentleman and seeing.
Well, it just shows what happens. And the numbers coming out of Afghanistan were fleeing a truly terrible regime. If you were a family with a couple of girls, they had no future. They weren't allowed to be educated. I've met young Afghani girls who have actually got to Australia, who have done very well. I met one who was so confident of doing well in the last year at school, I'm going to medical school at Sydney University next year. And I suspect that she did do well enough. I haven't checked.
One of the interesting things about refugees too is that by definition, by the way they get here, they show themselves to be people of great courage and great initiative. And they're probably the self-selected, the best group of arrivals to this country. And experience shows that they all work incredibly hard, study incredibly hard, and do everything they can to build a good life,
a better life
in the new community. Now that can only be to the benefit of the Australian community.
And they also exhibit great loyalty to Australia.
Yeah.
We're the country that's given them a home, given them a future, and they love Australia for it.
And it's a little bit worrying to think whether that will continue amongst people who were mistreated for months or years in detention centres. I think it might take them a little longer to feel affection to the country that despised them and mistreated them and then eventually accepted them.
The other side of this coin is that while in recent times with the new changed harsher laws, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people were trying to come to Australia, in those years upwards of 400,000 were going to Europe. So, I know in Germany one year 120,000, Britain 100,000. They have never tried to introduce the kind of laws that we have introduced in Australia. They have tried to handle the problem and the tensions that it's created, because 400,000 is a lot each year.
It is.
In countries that are already much more crowded than we are. But you know, they haven't resorted to our kinds of policies.
And Mr. Burnside, you're a great humanitarian as well, and you do a lot of volunteer work. How did you get involved in human rights? Was it an instinct you were born with?
I don't know. I think, I mean, my real introduction to activity in this area was my involvement in the Tampa case, which happened not because I knew anything about refugee law, but because I thought it was wrong to hold a bunch of bedraggled people on the deck of a steel ship in the tropics.
We might get back to that after the break.
Yes.
Okay. You're watching Visions. I'm Sally Dusting-Laird, and we'll be back after the break.